Before I even think about color, brushes, or texture, everything starts with the tonal values. Value is the foundation of this entire painting. If the values don't work, nothing else really matters. No amount of color harmony or detail will ever save it. A lot of beginners focus on color first because, color feels exciting. But value is what actually makes the portrait read. It's what gives the face form, depth, and structure. Even if this painting were converted to black and white, for example, it should still feel solid, believable, or convincing. So as I'm working here, I'm constantly asking myself one simple question. Is this shape lighter or darker than the one next to it? Before any rendering happens, drawing and construction are doing most of the heavy lifting. If the head isn't constructed properly, if the proportions are off or the features aren't sitting correctly on the skull, then the painting will struggle no matter how good the brushwork is. I'm thinking about the head as a three-dimensional form, not a flat two-dimensional image. The angle of the head, the tilt, the relationship between the brow, nose and chin, all of that needs to make sense before I move forward. So this is why I like to keep the drawing fairly simple but accurate. I'm not chasing details here, I'm just making sure the structure feels believable. So once the drawing is in place, I move into blocking in large value shapes with the underpainting. At this stage, I'm deliberately avoiding details. No eyelashes, no skin texture, no small transitions, just big, simple masses separating the lights and the shadows. This is one of the most important habits you can build as a portrait painter, learning to see and separate groups instead of fragments. If I start breaking those families up too early, the painting can quickly fall apart. Working in Rebelle really helps here because the software behaves so much like traditional paint. The way the paint blends, the way values mix naturally, it encourages you to think like a painter instead of, a technician. One thing I really like about Rebelle is how subtle value shifts happen when colors mix. Even when I'm technically using color, I'm still thinking almost entirely in terms of light and dark. As I refine the values, I'm constantly zooming in and out. If a painting only works when you zoom in, it doesn't really work. From a distance, the portrait should read clearly. You should immediately understand where the light is coming from, what the form of the head is, and where the focal point is. If something feels off, it's usually a value problem. It'll never be a color problem. Now, even though this painting is in color, I'm treating color as a secondary layer. Color sits on top of value. It rides on value. If you squint your eyes right now, most of the color information disappears, but the portrait should still hold together. That's always a good test. I'm keeping the color relationships simple and letting the values do the storytelling. As I start refining edges, I'm thinking about construction again. Edges aren't random, they describe form. Harder edges usually happen where forms turn sharply, or where there's a strong contrast in value. Softer edges appear where planes transition gradually, or where forms overlap subtly. Rebelle's brush engine makes it easier to control those transitions without them, feeling artificial. I'm not smudging, I'm painting. Another thing I pay close attention to is to not over-render, especially too early. Details should be earned. Now, yes, I'm painting in a slightly more tighter style, but I'm still always focusing on shapes, on large shapes. If the big value structure isn't solid, adding detail will only distract from the underlying issues. That's why I keep coming back to the big picture, even as the painting progresses. Every time I add something, I ask, does this support the overall value structure, or is it just a decoration? I like to almost refer to it as sort of stalling the process. The features, eyes, nose, mouth are all treated as simple forms first. One of the advantages of digital painting in Rebelle is the freedom to experiment without fear. I can push values, pull them back, test ideas, and that encourages bolder decisions. But even with that freedom, discipline also, it really matters. I'm still committing to value choices instead of endlessly tweaking. A confident value structure will always look better than a hesitant one. As I move towards the final stages, the changes become more subtle. Small value adjustments can have a big impact now, especially now that there's a better depiction of the context. At this point, color becomes more about temperature shifts than brightness, cooler versus warmer within the same value range. That's another reason value comes first. If your values are solid, you can play with color temperature without breaking the painting. Throughout the entire process, drawing, construction, and value are working together. They're not separate steps, they are layers of the same idea. Good drawing supports good values, and good values make color believable or convincing. And color enhances what's already there. If there's one takeaway from this painting, it's this: learn to see value clearly, and everything else becomes easier. Color becomes less intimidating, rendering becomes more intentional, and portraits start to feel solid instead of fragile. Thanks for watching, and I hope this breakdown gives you a clearer idea of how value, drawing, and construction all come together in a portrait, especially when working in a program like Rebelle that really rewards painterly thinking and painterly techniques. Anyway, stay in the paint.